Okay. After the first chapter, I think my big goal is to read way slower. Sorry about that, guys. I think that was like my biggest takeaway was that I really read too fast. I can't imagine how enjoyable that is. So if you bored with it, bear with me, then here's gonna be the second part. Hopefully just the second part. Chapter 1. These chapters are so friggin' long, it's crazy. But the book's big. Yeah. It's pretty big. Not that big. Pretty big. Okay. I'm just gonna get right into it. I like to think of myself as strong start. I like to think of myself as a perceptive person, as I suppose we all do. And in setting all this down, it's tempting to pencil a shadow gliding in overhead. But I was blind and deaf to the future. My single crushing worry was the meeting at school. When I told Tom to tell him I'd been suspended, whispering on the landline, she had taken away my cell phone. He hadn't seemed particularly surprised to hear it. Look, he said, cutting me off, don't be stupid, Theo. Nobody knows a thing. Just keep your fucking mouth shut. And before I could get another word, he said, sorry, I've got to go, and hung up. In the cab, I tried to crack my window to get some air. No luck. It smelled like someone had been changing dirty diapers back there, or maybe even taking an actual shit, and then tried to cover it up with a bunch of coconut air freshener that smelled like suntan lotion. Well, excuse me. The seats were greasy and patched with duct tape, and the shocks were nearly gone. Whenever we struck a bump, my teeth rattled, and so did the religious claptrap dangling from the rearview mirror, medallions, a curved sword, and a miniature dancing on a plastic chain, and a turbaned, bearded guru who gazed into the back seat with piercing eyes, palm raised in benediction. Along Park Avenue, ranks of red tulips stood at attention as we sped by. Bollywood pop, turned down to a low, almost subliminal whine, spiraled and sparkled hypnotically just at the threshold of my hearing. The leaves were just coming out of the trees. Delivery boys from D'Agostino's and Gristetti's pulled carts laden with groceries. Harried executive women in heels plunged down the sidewalk, dragging reluctant kindergartners behind them. A uniformed worker swept debris from the gutter into a dustpan on a stick. Lawyers and stockbrokers held their palms out and knit their brows as they looked up at the sky. As we jolted up the avenue, my mother looking miserable, clutching at the armrest to brace herself, I stared out the window at the dyspeptic workaday faces, worried-looking people in raincoats milling in grim throngs at the crosswalks, people drinking coffee from cardboard cups and talking on cell phones and glancing furtively side to side, and tried hard not to think of all the unpleasant fates that might be about to befall me, some of them involving juvenile court or jail. The cab swung into a sharp sudden turn onto 86th Street. My mother slid into me and grabbed my arm, and I saw she was clammy and pale as a cod. Are you carsick? I said, forgetting my own troubles for a moment. She had a woeful, fixed expression that I recognized all too well. Her lips were pressed tight, her forehead was glistening, and her eyes were glassy and huge. She started to say something and then clapped her hand to her mouth as the cab lurched to a stop at the light, throwing us forward and then back hard against the seat. Hang on, I said to her, and then leaned up and cracked and knocked on the greasy plexiglass so that the driver, a turbaned Sikh, started in surprise. Look, I called through the grill. This is fine, we'll get out here, okay? The Sikh, reflected in the garlanded mirror, gazed at me steadily. You want to stop here? Yes, please. But this is not the address you gave. I know, but this is good, I said, glancing back at my mother, mascara smeared, wilted looking, scrabbling though her bag. I just found a spelling mistake in this book. Or maybe it's a reading mistake. Scrabbling through her bag for her wallet. Is she all right? Said the cab driver doubtfully. Yes, she's fine. We just need to get out here, thanks. With trembling hands, my mother produced a crumple of damp-looking dollars and pushed them through the grill. As the Sikh slid his hand through and then palmed them, resignedly looking away, I climbed out, holding the door open for her. My mother stumbled a little, stepping onto the curb, and I caught her arm. Are you okay? I said to her timidly as the cab sped away. We were on Upper Fifth Avenue, by the mansions facing the park. She took a deep breath and then wiped her brow and squeezed my arms. Phew, she said, fanning her face with her palm. Her forehead was shiny, and her eyes were still a little unfocused, and she had the slightly ruffled aspect. What? Come here. My dog. And her eyes were still a little unfocused, and she had a slightly ruffled aspect of a seabird blown off course. Still. Sorry, still got the wobbles. Thank God we're out of that cab. I'll be fine, I just need some air. People streamed around us on the windy corner, schoolgirls in uniform, laughing and running and dodging around us, nannies pushing elaborate prams with babies seated in pairs and threes. A harried, lawyerly father brushed past us, towing his small son by the wrist. No, Braden, I heard him say to the boy who trotted to keep up. You shouldn't think that way. It's more important to have a job you like. We stepped aside to avoid the soap suds that a janitor was dumping from a pail on the sidewalk in front of his building. Tell me, said my mother, fingertips at her temple, was it just me, or was that cab unbelievably nasty? Hawaiian tropic and baby poo? Honestly, fanning the air in front of her face, it would have been okay if not for all the stopping and starting. I was perfectly fine, and then it just hit me. Why don't you ever just ask if you can sit in the front seat? You sound like your father. I looked away, embarrassed, for I'd heard it too, a hint of his annoying know-it-all tone. Let's walk over to Madison and find some place for you to sit down, I said. I was starving to death, and there was a diner over there I liked. My dog is just sitting by the door. Sorry. But then with a shudder almost, a visible wave of nausea, she took her head, air, dashing mascara smudges from under her eyes. The air feels good. Sure, I said, a bit too quickly, anxious to be accommodating. Whatever. I was trying hard to be agreeable, but my mother, fitful and woozy, had picked up on my tone. She looked at me closely, trying to figure out what I was thinking. This was another bad habit we'd fallen into, thanks to the years of life with my father, trying to read each other's minds. What? She said. Is there someplace you want to go? No, not really, I said, taking a step backwards and looking around. No, not really, I said, taking a step backwards and looking around in my consternation. Even though I was hungry, I felt in no position to insist on anything. I'll be fine, just give me a minute. Maybe, blinking and agitated, what did she want? What would please her? How about we go sit in the park? To my relief, she nodded. All right then, she said, in what I thought of as her Mary Poppins voice, but just till I catch my breath, and we started down towards the crosswalk of 79th Street, past topiaries Topiaries and baroque planters, ponderous doors laced with ironwork. The light had faded to an industrial gray, and the breeze was as heavy as tea kettle steam. Across the street, by the park, artists were setting up their stalls, unrolling their canvases, painting up their watercolor reproductions of St. Patrick's Cathedral and the Brooklyn Bridge. We walked along in silence. My mind was worrying busily on my own troubles. Had Tom's parents got a call? Why hadn't I thought to ask him? As well as what I was going to order for breakfast as soon as I could get her to the diner. Western omelet with home fries, side of bacon. She would have what she always had, rye toast with poached eggs and a cup of black coffee. And I was hardly paying attention where we were going when I realized she had just said something. She wasn't looking at me, but out over the park, and her expression made me think of a famous French movie I didn't know the name of, where distracted people walked down windblown streets and talked a lot, but didn't actually seem to be talking to each other. "What did you say?" I asked, after a few confused beats, walking faster to catch up with her. "Try more." She looked startled, as if she'd forgotten I was there. The white coat flapping in the wind added to her long-legged ibis quality, as if she were about to unfurl her wings and sail away over the park. "Try more what?" "Oh," her face went blank, and then she shook her head and laughed quickly in the sharp, childlike way she had. "No, I said time warp." Even though it was a strange thing to say, I knew what she meant, or thought I did. That shiver of disconnection, the missing seconds on the sidewalk like a hiccup of lost time, or a few frames snipped out of a film. No, puppy, just the neighborhood," tousling her hair, making me smile in a lopsided, half-embarrassed way. Puppy was my baby name. I didn't like it any more, nor the hair tousling either, but sheepish though I felt, I was glad to see her in a better mood. Always happens up here. Whenever I'm up here, it's like I'm 18 again and right off the bus. "Here?" I said doubtfully, permitting her to hold my hand, not normally something I would have done. "That's weird." I knew all about my mom's early days in Manhattan. A long way from Fifth Avenue, on Avenue B, in a studio above a bar, where bums slept in the doorway and bar fights spilled out onto the streets, and a crazy old lady named Mo kept 10 or 12 illegal cats in a blocked-off stairwell on the top floor. She shrugged. "Yeah, but up here it's still the same as the first days I ever saw it. Time tunnel. On the Lower East Side, well, you know what it's like down there, always something new. But for me it's more this Rip Van Winkle feeling, always further and farther away. Some days I'd wake up and it was like they came in and rearranged the storefronts in the night. Old restaurants out of business, some trendy new bar where the dry cleaners used to be." I maintained a respectful silence. The passage of time had been much on her mind lately. Maybe because her birthday was coming up. "I'm too old for this routine," she said a few days before we'd scrambled together over the apartment, rummaging under the sofa cushions and searching in the pockets of coats and jackets for enough change to pay the delivery boy from the deli. She dug her hand in her coat pocket. "Up here it's more stable," she said, though her voice was light and I could see the fog in her eyes. Clearly she hadn't slept well, thanks to me. Upper Park is one of the few places where you can still see what the city looked like in the 1890s. Gramercy Park too, and the Village, some of it. When I first came to New York, I thought this neighborhood was Edith Wharton and Franny and Zoe and breakfast at Tiffany's all rolled into one. Franny and Zoe was on the west side. Yeah, but I was too dumb to know that. All I can say is it was pretty different from the Lower East. Homeless guys starting fires in trash cans. Up here on the weekends, it was magical. Wandering the museum, lollylopping from Central Park on my own. Lollylopping? So much of her talk was exotic in my ear, and lollop sounded like some horse term from her childhood, a lazy gallop maybe, some equine gait between a canter and a trot. "Oh, you know, just lopping and slopping along like I do." No money, holes in socks, living off oatmeal. Believe it or not, I used to walk up here some weekends, saving my train fare for the ride home. That was when they still had tokens instead of cards. And even though we're supposed to pay to get into the museum, they suggested donations. Well, I guess I must have had a lot more back then. Or maybe they just felt sorry for me because, oh no, she said, in a changed tone, stopping cold, so that I walked a few steps by without noticing. What? Turning back. What is it? Felt something. She held out her palm and looked at the sky. Did you? And just as she said it, the light seemed to fail. The sky darkened rapidly, darker every second. The wind rustled the trees in the park, and the new leaves on the trees stood out tender and yellow against black clouds. Geez, wouldn't you know it, said my mother. It's about to pour. Leaning over the street, looking north, no cabs. I caught her hand again. Come on, I said. We'll have better luck on the other side. Impatiently, we waited for the last few blanks on the Don't Walk sign. Bits of paper were whirling in the air and tumbling down the street. Hey, there's a cab, I said, looking up Fifth. And just as I said it, a businessman ran to the curb with his hand up. The light popped off. Across the street, artists ran to cover their paintings with plastic. The coffee vendor was pulling down the shutters on his cart. We hurried across, and just as we made it to the other side, a fat drop of rain splashed on my cheek. Sporadic dark circles, widely spaced, big as dimes, began to pop up on the pavement. Oh, drat, cried my mother. She fumbled in her bag for the umbrella, which was scarcely big enough for one person, let alone two. And then it came down. Cold sweeps of rain blowing in sideways, broad gusts tumbling in the treetops and flapping in the awnings across the street. My mother was struggling to get the cranky little umbrella up without much success. People on the street and in the park were holding newspapers and briefcases over their head, scurrying up the stairs to the portico of the museum, which was the only place on the street to get out of the rain, and there was something festive and happy about the two of us, hurrying up the steps beneath the flimsy striped umbrella, quick, quick, for all the world as if we were escaping something terrible instead of running right into it. Uh-oh. I feel like because we know that she's about to pass, it's really building up this story. Sad. 3 important things had happened to my mother after she arrived in New York City on the bus from Kansas. Friendless and practically penniless, the first was when a booking agent named Davy Joe Pickering had spotted her waiting tables in a coffee shop in the village. An underfed teenager in Doc Martens, waiting tables in a coffee shop. An underfed teenager in Doc Martens and thrift shop clothes with a braid down her back so long she could sit on it. When she'd brought him his coffee, he'd offer her $700 and then $1,000 to fill in for a girl who hadn't shown up for work at a catalog shoot across the street. He'd pointed out the location van, the equipment being set up in Sheridan Square Park. He'd counted out the bills, laid them on the counter. Give me 10 minutes, she said. She'd brought out the rest of her breakfast orders, then hung up her apron and walked out. I was only a mail-order model, she always took pains to explain to people, by which she meant she'd never done fashion magazines or couture, only circulars for chain stores, inexpensive casuals for junior misses in Missouri and Montana. Sometimes it was fun, she said, but mostly it wasn't. Swimsuits in January, shivering from flu, tweeds and woolens in summer heat, sweltering for hours amid fake autumn leaves, while the studio fan blew hot air and a guy for makeup darted between takes to powder the sweat off her face. But during those years of standing around and pretending to be in college, posing in mock campus settings in stiff pairs and threes, books clutched to her chest, she'd managed to sock away enough money to send herself to college for real. Art history at NYU. She'd never seen a great painting in person until she was 18 and moved to New York. And she was eager to make up for lost time, pure bliss, perfect heaven. She'd said up to the neck in the art books and poring over the same old slides, Manet, Vuillard, until her vision started to blur. It's crazy, she'd say, but I'd be perfectly happy if I could sit looking at the same half-dozen paintings for the rest of my life. I can't think of a better way to go insane. College was the second important thing that had happened to her in New York. For her, probably the most important. And if not for the third, meeting and marrying my father, not so lucky as the first two, she would almost certainly have finished her master's and gone on to her PhD. Whenever she had a few hours to herself, she always headed straight to the Frick or MoMA or the Met, which is why, as we stood under the dripping portico of the museum, gazing out across hazy Fifth Avenue and the raindrops jumping white in the street, I was not surprised when she took her umbrella out and said, "Maybe we should go in and poke around for a bit till it stops." What I wanted was breakfast. Sure. She glanced at her watch. Might as well. We're not going to get a cab and all this. She was right. Still, I was starving. When are we going to eat? I thought grumpily, following her up the stairs. For all I knew, she was going to be so mad after the meeting she wouldn't take me out to lunch at all. I would have to go home and eat a bowl of cereal or something. Yet the museum always felt like a holiday. And once we were inside, with the glad roar of tourists all around us, I felt strangely insulated from whatever else the day might hold in store. The great hall was loud and rank with the smell of wet overcoats. A drenched crowd of Asian senior citizens surged past. After a crisp stewardessy guide, bedraggled Girl Scouts huddled whispering near the coat check. Beside the information desk stood a line of military school cadets in gray dress uniforms, hats off, clasped hands behind their backs. For me, a city kid, always confined by apartment walls, the museum was interesting, mainly because of its immense size. A palace where the rooms went on forever and grew more and more deserted the farther in you went. Some of the neglected bedchambers and roped-off drawing rooms in the depths of European decorating felt bound up in the deep enchantment, as if no one had set foot in them for hundreds of years. Ever since I'd started riding the train by myself, I'd loved to go there alone and roam until I got lost, wandering deeper and deeper in the maze and galleries until sometimes I found myself in forgotten halls of armor and porcelain that I'd never seen before, and occasionally was unable to find again. As I hung behind my mother in the admissions line, I put my head back and started fixating into the cavernous ceiling dome 2 stories above. If I stared hard enough, sometimes I could make myself feel like I was floating around up there like a feather, a trick from early childhood that was fading as I got older. Meanwhile, my mother, red-nosed and breathless from our dash through the rain, was grappling for her wallet. "Maybe when we're done, I'll duck in the gift shop," she was saying. I'm sure the last thing Mathilde wants is an art book, but it'll be hard for her to complain much about it without sounding stupid. Yikes, I said. The presents for Mathilde. Mathilde was the art director of the advertising firm where my mother worked. She was the daughter of a French fabric importing magnate, younger than my mother and notoriously fussy, apt to throw tantrums if the car service or the catering wasn't up to par. Yep. Wordlessly, she offered me a stick of gum, which I accepted, and then threw the pack back in her purse. I mean, that's Mathilde's whole thing. The well-chosen gift shouldn't cost a lot of money. It's all about the perfect, inexpensive paperweight from the flea market, which would be fantastic, I guess, if any of us had time to go downtown and scour the flea market. Last year, when it was Prue's turn, Last year, when it was Prue's turn, she panicked and ran into Saks on her lunch hour and ended up spending $50 of her own money on top of what they gave her for sunglasses. Tom Ford, I think. And Mathilde still had to get her crack in about Americans and consumer culture. Prue isn't even American. She's Australian. Have you discussed it with Sergio? I said. Sergio seldom in the office, though often in society pages with people like Donatella Versace, was the multimillionaire owner of my mother's firm. Discussing things with Sergio was akin to asking, would Jesus do? Sergio's idea of an art book is Helmut Newton, or maybe that coffee table book that Madonna did a while back. I started to ask who Helmut Newton was, but then had a better idea. Why don't you get her a Metro card? My mother rolled her eyes. Believe me, I ought to. There had recently been a flap at work when Mathilde's car was held up in traffic, leaving her stranded in Williamsburg at a jeweler's studio. Like, anonymously, leave it on her desk, an old one without any money on it, just see what she'd do. I can tell you what she'd do, said my mother, sliding her membership card through the ticket window, fire her assistant, and probably half the people in production as well. My mother's advertising firm specialized in women's accessories. All day long, under the agitated and slightly vicious eye of Mathilde, she supervised photo shoots where crystal earrings glistened on drifts of fake holiday snow and crocodile handbags, unattended in the back seat of deserted limousines. Deserted limousines, glowed in coronas of celestial light. She was good at what she did. She preferred working behind the camera rather than in front of it, and I knew she got a kick out of seeing her work on subway posters and on billboards in Times Square. But despite the glossy sparkle of the job, champagne breakfast, gift bags from Bergdorf's, the hours were long, and there was a hollowness at the heart of it all. A hollowness at the heart of it. I knew there was a hollowness at the heart of it that I knew made her sad. What she really wanted was to go back to school, though of course we both knew that there was little chance of that now that my dad had left. Okay, she said, turning from the window and handing me my badge. Help me keep an eye on the time, will you? It's a massive show. She indicated a poster, Portraiture and Nature Mort, Northern Masterworks of the Golden Age. We can't see it all on this visit, but there are a few things. Her voice drifted away, and I trailed behind her up the great staircase, torn between the prudent need to stick close and the urge to slink a few paces back and try to pretend I wasn't with her. I hate to race through like this, she was saying as I caught up with her at the top of the stairs, but then again, it's the kind of show where you need to come here 2 or 3 times. There's the anatomy lesson, and we do have to see that. But what I really want to see is one tiny, rare piece by a painter who was Vermeer's teacher. Greatest old master you'd never heard of. The Franz Hals paintings are a big deal, too. You know Hals, don't you? The Jolly Topper? The almshouse governors? Right, I said tentatively. Of the paintings she'd mentioned, the anatomy lesson was the only one I knew. A detail from it was featured on the poster from the exhibition. A livid flesh, multiple shades of black, alcoholic-looking surgeons with bloodshot eyes and red noses. Art 101 stuff, said my mother. Here, take a left. Upstairs it was freezing cold. With my hair still wet from the rain, no, this way, said my mother, catching my sleeve. The show was complicated to find, and as we wandered the busy galleries, weaving in and out of crowds, turning right, turning left, backtracking through labyrinths of confusing signage and layout, large, gloomy reproductions of the anatomy lesson appeared erratically and in unexpected junctures. Baleful signposts, the same old corpse with the flayed arm, red arrows beneath, operating theater this way. I was not very excited at the prospect of a lot of pictures of Dutch people standing around in dark clothes, and when we pushed through the glass doors from the echoing halls into the carpeted hush, I thought at first we'd gone into the wrong hall. The walls glowed with a warm, dull haze of opulence, a generic mellowness of antiquity, but then it all broke apart into clarity and color and pure northern light. Portraits, interiors, still lifes, some tiny, others majestic, ladies with husbands, ladies with lapdogs, lonely beauties in embroidered gowns, and splendid solitary merchants in jewels and furs. Ruined banquet tables littered with peeled apples and walnut shells, draped tapestries and silver trompe l'oeils with crawling insects, striped flowers. And the deeper we wandered, the stranger and more beautiful the pictures became. Peeled lemons with rind slightly hardened at the knife's edge, the greenish shadow of a patch of mold, light striking the rim of a half-empty wine glass. "I like this one too," whispered my mother, coming up alongside me at a smallish and particularly haunting still life. A white butterfly against a dark ground, floating over some red fruit. The background, a rich chocolate black, had complicated warmth suggesting crowded storerooms and history, the passage of time. They really knew how to work this angle, the Dutch painters, ripeness sliding into rot. The fruit's perfect, but it won't last, but it's about to go. And see here especially, she said, reaching over the shoulder to trace in the air with her finger. This passage, the butterfly, the underwing, was so powdery and delicate, it looked as if the color would smear if she touched it. How beautifully he plays it, stillness with the tremble of movement. How long did it take him to paint that? My mother, who'd been standing a bit too close, stepped back to regard the paintings, oblivious to the gum-chewing security guard whose attention she'd attracted, who was staring fixed at her back. "Well, the Dutch invented the microscope," she said. Let's see how much. And we're not going to finish chapter 1, but there's a couple more pages of this part of chapter 1. Okay, I'm going to take a glass of water. Wait, let me start the sentence. "Well, the Dutch invented the microscope," she said. "They were jewelers, grinders of lenses. They wanted it all as detailed as possible because even the tiniest thing means something. Whenever you see flies or insects in still lifes, a wilted petal, a black spot on the apple, the painter is giving you a secret message. He's telling you that living things don't last. It's all temporary. Death is life. That's why they're called nature's morts. Maybe you don't see it at first, but all the beauty and bloom, the little specks of rot. But if you look closer, there it is." I leaned down to read the note, printed in discreet letters on the wall, which informed me that the painter, Adrian Court, dates of birth and death uncertain, had been unknown in his own lifetime, and his work unrecognized until the 1950s. "Hey," I said, "Mom, did you see this?" But she'd already moved on. The rooms were chilly and hushed with the lowered ceilings and none of the palatial roar and echo of the great hall. Though the exhibition was moderately crowded, still it had the sedate, meandering feel of a backwater, a certain vacuum-sealed calm, a long sighs and extravagant exulsions, like a room full of students taking a test. I trailed behind my mother as she zigzagged from portrait to portrait, much faster than she usually went through an exhibition, from flowers to card tables to fruit, ignoring a great many of the paintings. Our fourth silver our fourth silver tankard or dead pheasant, and veering to others without hesitation. Now, Hall's, he's so corny sometimes with all these tipplers and wenches, but oh, he's on, he's on. None of this fussiness and precision. He's working wet on wet, slash, it's so fast. The faces and hands, rendered really finely. He knows what the eye is drawn to, but look at the clothes, so loose, almost sketched. Look how open and modern the brushwork is. We spent some time in front of a Hall's portrait of a boy holding a skull. Don't be mad, Theo, but who do you think he looks like? Somebody, tugging at the back of my hair, who could use a haircut. And also 2 big Hall's portraits of banqueting officers, which she told me were very, very famous and a gigantic influence on Rembrandt. Van Gogh loves Hall's too. Somewhere he's writing about Hall's, he says, Franz Hall's has no less than 29 shades of black, or was it 27? I followed after her with a sort of dazed sense of lost time, delighted by her preoccupation, how oblivious she seemed of the minutes flying. It seemed that our half-hour was almost up, but still I wanted to dawdle and distract her, in the infantile hope that time would slip away and we would miss the meeting altogether. Now Rembrandt, my mother said, everybody always says this painting is about reason and enlightenment, the dawn of scientific inquiry, all that. But to me, it's creepy how polite and formal they are, milling around the slab like a buffet at a cocktail party. Although, she pointed, see how 2 puzzled guys in the back there, they're not looking at anybody, they're looking at us, you and me, like they see us standing here in front of them. 2 people from the future, startled. What are you doing here? Very naturalistic. But then she traced the corpse midair with her finger. The body is painted in a very natural way. The body isn't painted in a very natural way at all. If you look at it, a weird glow coming off it. Do you see? Alien autopsy almost. See how it lights up the faces of the men looking down at it, like it's shining with its own light source? He's painting it with that radioactive quality because he wants your eye to draw to it. Make it jump out at us. And here, she pointed at the flayed hand. See how he calls attention to it by painting it so big, all out of proportion to the rest of the body? He's even turned it around so the thumb is on the wrong side. Do you see? Well, he didn't do that by mistake. The skin is off the hand. We see immediately something's wrong. But by reversing the thumb, it makes it look even more wrong. It registers subliminally, even if we can't put our finger on it. Something really out of order, not right. Very clever trick. We were standing behind the crowd of Asian tourists, so many heads that I could see the pictures. We were standing behind a crowd of Asian tourists, so many heads that I could see the picture scarcely at all. But then again, I didn't care that much, because I'd seen this girl. She'd seen me too. We'd been eyeing each other as we were going through the galleries. I wasn't quite even sure what was so interesting about her, since she was younger than me and a little strange looking. Nothing at all like the girls I usually got crushes on. Cool, serious beauties who cast disdainful looks around the hallway and went out with big guys. This girl had bright red hair, her movements were swift, her face sharp and mischievous and strange, and her eyes were an odd color, a golden honeybee brown. And though she was too thin, all elbows and in a way almost plain, yet there was something about her too that made my stomach go watery. She was swinging and knocking a battered-looking flute case around with her. A city kid? On her way to a music lesson? Maybe not, I thought, circling behind her as I followed my mother into the next gallery. Her clothes were a little too bland and suburban. She was probably a tourist, but she moved with more assertion than most of the girls I knew. And sly, composed glance, and she slid over me with brush as she brushed past and sly, composed glance that she slid over me as she brushed past me drove me crazy. I was trailing along behind my mother, only half paying attention to what she was saying, and then she stopped in front of a painting so suddenly that I almost ran into her. I'm going to stop there. Okay, cliffhanger, what? All right, guys, I hope that was a more appropriate tempo of reading. Be back for part 3. God, I feel like there's going to be a part 4 now.